the indices and the currencies, and then we're going to go to the individual pairs. Starting with the US dollar, if you look at the chart of this weekly chart, last week the dollar was slightly negative, and as you can see that this week actually there hasn't been much action in the US dollar. That's the daily chart. We had a couple of days up and a couple of days up and a couple of days down, and we have been trading between the 82.04 and the 82.80, which is a narrow range, but it is two significant, really strong structural points, and it's been holding the market for several weeks now. So at this stage, or for this week, we can continue saying that the US dollar is pretty much kind of neutral, because what we have here is a buy signal by the fact that the market came down to the 82.45. The low of the week was 82.06, and then it came back above the prior week's low, which is the 82.22, and it closed at 82.63, which is pretty much closer to the 82.8. If that was the case, it would have been a buy. But if you go down to the daily chart, you would see that it did actually went above the 82.80, and the high was 82.94, and then it came back down and closed at 82.63. So what we're having here, we're having a buy signal from here, and we're having a sell signal from the top. So we started the week with having a buy signal coming up from the 82.04, and then we ended the week on Friday by having a close which would indicate further weakness or gives us a sell signal. If I condense it and go to a weekly chart, you can see that it's pretty much kind of a neutral week. We had a buy signal and a sell signal, and we closed in the middle of nowhere, in the middle, somewhere in between 82.04 and 82.80. So it's kind of one closes the other, so it's not particularly neither a buy nor a sell signal. So it's a neutral week for the US dollar. But having said that, there is something that I want to share with you that you're going to see on the dollar, on the pound itself, which might have been the cause of this move. The next one we're going to go to is the Australian dollar. And as you can see, the Aussie is continuing higher. It is pretty much near the all-time high. The all-time high was 106.50. We had a structural point here at 106.06. So we are making an attempt to continue and retest the highs. The fundamental piece of news with regards to the Australian dollar, which is that the Royal Bank of Australia has decided not to raise the interest rate any further, and that should have had a negative impact or a negative effect on the Aussie, and that's what you see on Friday. But at the end of the day, the Australian dollar sold off at the beginning of the day, and then towards Friday evening we had this kind of a turnaround. So we are going to go with the major trend so far, that the Aussie is still on a buy and the Australian dollar is a strong currency. So I'm just going to go back and so that is my dollar, and for the Aussie we're going to, since we didn't have a very strong close, I'm just going to give it one plus sign that it is reasonably strong. So I'm going to hold that as the Aussie as relatively strong. The next one we're going to look at is the Japanese yen. And we have closed the week at 127.85. We have been sitting above the structure point, which is the 127.37. This is based on the index now for the last 2 weeks. If you look at the weekly chart, you can see that we really have a very strong close. We had 2 attempts to break below the 127.57. It held itself and now it turned around and it closed the week for 127.85. So this makes our trade easy. We're looking to be long the yen. The yen so far, between the dollar, the Australian and the yen so far is the strongest. Okay. The next strong currency that I want to look at is the Canadian. And what you see in front of you is the chart of the Canadian dollar on a weekly base. And that is one of the strongest closes that we had this week. This is one of the strongest closes that we had this week. And therefore we should be looking for the Canadian to continue higher. The CAD has been quite strong, as you can see. You got one move, a positive day, a second day, a third day, and a fourth day. We had a pause on Friday, and then we had this kind of a reversal. All the pairs that you would see had this kind of a closing on Friday, which was a kind of a sell-off at the beginning of the day, and then it ended up this way. This is the same thing that happened with the Aussie. As you can see, same thing that happened with the, not with the yen, but in this case, the same thing that happened with the pound, believe it or not. I mean, this was actually a pretty red day on Friday. It was a very weak day for the pound, and then we had this turnaround. The same kind of a close, as you can see, pretty much in the Swiss, and the same also with the euro. So something has taken place on Friday afternoon, which has been, I have tried to find out what was the cause of it, but we had this kind of a reversal in the session on Friday afternoon in most of every pair. So we're going to take that reversal with a grain of salt. So except for the Canadian dollar, as I said, which has been strong, if you will, for all the week. So the Canadian and the Japanese yen, as you can see, are two solid currency. The yen has been holding its own. The Canadian has been pushing higher. So the CAD is one of the currencies that we're going to look at being buyers of. Okay, that's the CAD. The next one we're going to look at is the Swiss franc. And as you can see here, it is the same setup that we had in the US dollar on the dollar index. We started the week by having a sell signal on Thursday, right there when it traded below the 102.62, and then we ended up having a buy signal when it traded below the 102.17, and then it turned around and came back, and it closed in the middle of nowhere. So it is kind of a neutral setup, if you will, on the Swiss franc, but the bias with the Swiss is still to the downside. In this case, since it closed at 102.45, our buy signal will actually be easy before we can decide to go long the Swiss. All what we need is for it to trade above the 102.62. So thus far we're going to go with the major trend, which is to the downside. That's going to be the overriding trend, and if it comes above the 102.62, that will be the beginning of a short covering, and that will be our buying point for the Swiss. So since it is neutral, then we're going to go with the overriding trend, and we're going to type in the Swiss, not as strong as it was last week, but this time it is going to be neutral. So the Swiss is neutral with a negative bias. Now, last week, the euro getting into the beginning of the week, it was strong, and the pound was neutral, was neither strong nor weak, was kind of a neutral. And if we go now and look at the euro, that was the beginning of last week. We had this kind of push up above the structural point, and then this move, when it reached the high of the 124 or so, it faltered and it started coming down, and now it is traded below the 102.84. Actually, this is a structural point here. In this case, based on the index, it is the 103, the 103.05. That's based upon the index. And having closed below the 123.05, that means that we are in a sell mode. I mean, we have a sell signal on the euro, and we should be looking at taking the euro to the downside. So the clear sell signal that we have this week is primarily in the euro. So last but not least is the interesting one, which is the British pound. And the British pound, as you can see from the chart, it has been giving us this negative, narrowing, contracting, low volatility, extremely low volatility triangle. But what's happening lately, just in June, we have been having this very tight volatility. I mean, it will come down to the day and turn around and go up to the next structure point. And as you can see, when we go back to the pound dollar, the two structure points is the 156.02 and the 157.60, and it's been flipping between those two structure points pretty much like a charm. Every time it goes below one, it turns around, and for no reason, apparent reason, or something that we're aware of for the time being. It could be intervention, it could be somebody buying for whatever reason. But basically, this is what's happening, and the why is not important. What's happening right now is what we call the coiling effect. That is what we call the coiling effect. It's like turning around one of those coils, and now before, when you're trying to turn the coil in, you had a full swing. You can turn it for 180 degrees. Keep on turning it for 180 degrees. And the more you come to the center of the coil, when you're unable to have a full 360 degrees turn, you begin to get smaller turns, and this is when you get to the end of the coil, and that spring is ready to explode, to release all the energy that it has been holding. And therefore you can see that within that late triangle, if I can do this pretty much for the last couple of months, and it's getting to be tighter and tighter and tighter. I mean, practically every day is failing to make a high and failing to make a low, and it's coiling on either way. But the sum total of the coiling is still below the two structure points. It's still below the 156.89, and it's still below the 157.36. And if you look at the index, on Friday it did go above. The high was 157, the structure point is 156.89, and it closed the week at 156.71. So that is a sell signal, and we should be looking for it to come down somewhere over here. So we're going to be looking at the pound from a selling point of view, unless it comes above the structure point. So the pound now is going to be a sell, because we do have a sell signal. It is not as profound as the one that we have in the euro, but it is coiling and it could be explosive. So the way we're going to be trading this week, or the pairs that we're going to line up together this week, we're going to be looking at the euro, to be shorting the euro. We can go short the euro yen. We can go short the euro Aussie. We can go short the euro CAD. We can also go short the euro dollar. We can also go short the pound. We can go short the pound yen, the pound Aussie, the pound CAD, and the pound dollar. We can also keep an eye on the Australian dollar and the CAD against the Swiss. So we can go along the Aussie Swiss. We can go along the CAD Swiss. We can also go along the yen Swiss, the Swiss yen. So we're going to go short the euro across the board, we're going to go short the pound across the board, and then we can go long the Aussie Swiss and long the CAD Swiss. I will not be too excited about the Aussie yen, because the Aussie is kind of strong, but the yen is stronger. If you look at the chart for the yen, you can see it is kind of holding its own pretty much, and it's closing near the high of the day. If you look at the weekly chart, you have a structurally strong chart, but if you look at the Aussie pair, it is kind of a neutral week. I mean, it didn't have no positive effect, no negative effect. And if you want to take a look at this week by itself, the high of last week is 105.41. The close of this week is 105.32. So that close is not that exciting. It's a neutral close, and if you want to be specific, it's a short-term sell. So therefore, I would not be pairing the Aussie with a strong pair. I can pair the Aussie with a weak pair. Therefore, I will not, or we should not pair the Aussie with the yen, because the yen, as I said, is strong, and there is no reason in dealing with two strong pairs at the same time. Okay, so we're going short the euro across the board, short the pound across the board. We can go long the Aussie Swiss, we can go long the CAD Swiss, and we are going to leave the Aussie CAD, the Aussie yen, and the CAD yen for the time being. All right, that is the indices. Let me save that.